the European Union, and then all the sectors made their own proposals regarding their sectors. And currently, we are now holding very intensive discussions about the future of the European Union. And the future will be determined by our ambition, by the budget that will be available for us, by the amounts of money that we will be able to invest into agriculture, security, research and development, and many other important areas. Indeed, we are now seeking to find the solution, the post-Brexit solution that will be of the great importance to all the member states and the well-being of all the citizens in the EU. Today we have invited an important guest, expert guest, who is very knowledgeable about the European Union agriculture policy, Tassos Haniočiu from DG Agri, and he has extensive experience in the EU agricultural policy. And our other guest is Rolandas Taraškevičius, advisor to the Agriculture Minister of Lithuania, who also has a lot of experience in the political field. So without any further ado, may I invite Tassos to make his presentation and how the proposal on the agricultural budget looks like from the European Commission perspective. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arnoldas, and thanks for the opportunity to come back to Vilnius. I don't know how many of you were here in January when we made a presentation with my friend Rolandas here. In the meantime, his team won my team in basketball. I don't know if this sets a precedent for the current debate, but there is a difference. In this championship, we're all participating, we're all partners. So I don't think there is any winner or loser in this situation. I mean, we have to find a way of moving all together in what, in the context of agriculture, is very interesting, the longest and clearly the most common of all policies of the European Union. Those of you that were here in January were not going to be surprised by the summary of the future CAP priorities at a glance, which are not on this slide where we have the nice presentations, but on this one. So what we have is the simplification and modernization of the common agricultural policy, the support to the development of a knowledge-based agriculture, higher ambitions on environment and climate, and a fairer and more effective distribution of support across member states and farmers. And I'm very much aware from the fact that the last bullet point already raises some eyebrows and some questions from your side that I'm pretty sure we will have more opportunity to discuss later on. But let me try to tell you why we arrived at these conclusions. Well, admittedly, this is a dense slide, especially as I see it's even more dense than in mine, which is in English. But we did a lot of analysis, and there has been a lot of analysis done outside the European Commission, and we did a very wide public consultation to arrive at the conclusions we arrived. And these conclusions are that the CAP has some very concrete achievements for which we think we could be proud of, and we should not hide. And these achievements concern the significant improvement of the competitiveness of the EU agriculture as a result of successive reforms. Best evidence is in the presence of the European Union in world markets, the largest exporter of agricultural products and the largest importer of agricultural products, with an increasing agricultural trade surplus, which is driven mainly by the fact that most of the EU exports are exports of value-added products with specific characteristics that make European food so attractive to the developed world and to the increasing, the affluent consumers of the fast developing countries. The second characteristic that is an achievement of the common agricultural policy relates to jobs growth and poverty reduction. Up until recently, we did analysis where we assumed that the cap disappeared in models, and we looked at the result. And the result was we kept producing, but producing with more impact on the environment in the most competitive regions of the Union, and we had abandonment everywhere else. This time around, we didn't make assumptions about what would happen if, but the World Bank did a very detailed study about the impact of the Common Agricultural Policy in the social dimension it has. And in this study, that was done at the level of NUTS 3, which is a regional level that goes pretty detailed, what the bank has found is that the cap is present everywhere in the Union, with a positive impact on growth, on jobs, and on poverty reduction, and also with a very significant impact in this evolution of decoupled support. At the same time, the World Bank also found that member states are not in the same, what they call it in their terms, transformation curve. They find themselves in different stages of structural adjustment, which implies that they have different specific needs in improving their competitiveness, and this also explains why, as I will explain later on, we suggest much more flexibility to member states to address these issues. And the third element is the relative income stability. I know there are farmers among you that would say, which planet has he landed from? We have faced problems in income. Yes, it's true, and farm income has been volatile, but the farm income in the European Union has been volatile around a rather constant term, and in fact it's slightly increasing average over the years, while if you see at other parts of the world, it has collapsed in recent years. And this is also the result of the type of support we provide in the European Union. But if we have achievements, we also should not shy away from the fact that we also have some challenges and some weaknesses that we need to address. The first relates to the environmental performance of European agriculture. It's not a catastrophe as some continue to claim, and that's why I added a graph afterwards to show that there has been progress there. But it's nowhere near what we need to do in the future, especially because climate change introduces new type of challenges. The second area that we need to focus concretely is productivity. A lot of the growth in productivity is a result of the outflow of labor from agriculture. And we need to see what investment, innovation, and new technologies can bring more, because this is an area where, unlike other parts of the economy, with new technologies, you add new types of jobs. It's not like the banking sector, for example, or the retail sector, where scanning or electronic banking would put at risk jobs. New technologies in the rural areas add jobs because they introduce knowledge and the transfer of knowledge to those that want to use it. And the third area where we continue to have debates, and I'm in Lithuania, I'm aware of that, that's where we will start having debates, is the issues of equity and the distribution of support, and also, of course, the issue of the simplification of the Common Agricultural Policy. The third thing that we need to keep in mind is three very important changes in the environment within which the Common Agricultural Policy is going to participate, even ignoring the budget. We're not at the same price environment that we were in the previous reform. It's a very different one. We're not in the same trade environment that we were in the previous one. It's a very different one because trade tensions are emerging. People seem to have a very short memory about the positive impact of trade and the very negative impact of trade conflicts. And there is much more focus on regional and bilateral agreements than the multilateral ones, which puts much more stress on the market access weaknesses of the European agriculture. And third, and extremely important, sustainability development goals and climate change commitments. These are new, and these are requirements at the EU level translated in very different ways in the different member states that we need to clearly address. So three very brief graphs to explain where we are. This is the evolution of prices. it's a complex graph, but from which what you need to keep is, with green you have the long-term evolution of agricultural prices, the others are fertilizer with purple, energy with red. Energy here is both natural gas, petrol, and also coal, and also metals and minerals, which is a reflection of the economic cycle. What is important to keep in mind is average prices are lower than where they were when we started this discussion. There is less volatility, but also prices don't move together. So this is a new feature compared to what they had 2013. This is a graph that shows what climate change challenges are. I don't know how this has been translated, I'm pretty sure accurately. It comes from the Munich reinsurer, and it shows at world level extreme weather events. Events that are linked with storms, with green, linked with water, with blue, and linked with temperatures, both hot and cold, with amber. Whichever way you see it, the trend is pretty challenging, let's put it that way. And it's challenging for everybody. Now, this is the new graph, and that's the evolution of emissions stemming from agriculture, ammonia, greenhouse gas, and also what is happening in the gross nitrogen balance in the soil. There has been an improvement over the years. But, I mean, you have much more volatility in the gross nitrogen balance because it's also weather linked. But what we see is that in recent years, we seem to be reaching some limits. And unless we change significantly agricultural practices and we introduce the advantages of new technologies, we will have problems in meeting the commitments we have all assumed. Now, how does the CAP fit into the MFF discussion, the discussion about the next budget? There is an element of continuity in the priorities that we have. Clearly, there is a 5% cut in the budget, and that's the first time that we have a cut in the budget of the Common Agricultural Policy. There is a long debate on whether this is a 5% or more, and what is the difference between nominal and fixed prices, current or constant. I've been around many, many years, maybe too many. Every single time we had the proposal in the budget, we had the same debate. Every single time we presented the same thing. Those of us that were economists translated the fixed prices into nominal prices. This time around, you had everything. You had both fixed and nominal prices, and you also had all the details per member state. So this is not a new debate. The 5% cut is in nominal terms, and this is what the farmers are going to see. In the past, they were seeing a fixed level. Second, there is a very strong focus on the C of the CAP, the common element of the policy. I don't know what letter is the C. It's a B, actually, in Lithuania. Yeah. But why is this important? It is important because the focus now is on the objectives, on the added EU value of what we're doing, and not on the common control aspects we have. This is a very significant shift in priorities, which requires a shift in mentalities that we all have to do. And the third thing is there is a much better link to other policies, whether it's environment, climate, structural funds, and cohesion, research, health. And this link helps both the Common Agricultural Policy and other policies. Now, the main changes that you will hear also later are on environment and climate ambition that goes up significantly. There is much more focus on the specification of the objectives, and I'll spend some time on this later on, and a much better focus on the targeting of support to improve the synergies between the economy and the environment, and to resolve a tension that exists out there, that if you do some things that are good for the economic performance, they're negative for the environmental performance. This is one of the things that is dépassé, it's outdated anymore in agriculture that moves into precision farming, because this allows you to improve both the economic and the environmental performance, and it is relatively size neutral. Both small and bigger farmers can use it, provided that the knowledge is transferred to them. And finally, the main expected impacts from these changes, much greater reliance on research, knowledge, innovation, and the digital economy to modernize the CAP. You cannot simplify the CAP if you don't modernize it. We have to be clear and straightforward on this. An approach that is based on the needs on the ground that member states have and on evidence, which also implies much more flexibility for them to do the right thing, and also a greater focus on performance, a shift from compliance to performance. Let's be clear. We don't stop controls and compliance. We change the weight these have. For the same reason that we don't invent now a focus on performance. We were analyzing the impact of the CAP. But there is much more weight on what we are expected to deliver in the future than actually on how we're going to measure the width of every hedge. And because we use this example, let's be clear. When we say that we don't need to measure the width of the hedges, it doesn't mean that we don't do it in the Commission and you member states do it. It means that when and where we think that we need to have hedges, we have to measure the impact that they have on soil erosion, on biodiversity, on landscape features and the rural amenities. Two graphs that are necessary, and we cannot discuss the future of the CAP without them. One is the long-term evolution of the CAP. I don't know if there is a pointer.
There must be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Since there is a pointer, I think you're web streaming this, so I have to do some exercises here. On the left-hand side, in nominal terms, the budget of the Common Agricultural Policy in billion euros. First problem, because the EU keeps changing and there are member states that are being added and one that is going to be subtracted in the future, you cannot only look at the absolute figure of the CAP budget and find out what it means. You have to look at the right-hand side, which is the percentage of the CAP in the EU GDP. And you multiply it by 100, and you have the percentage of the CAP in the budget, because roughly the budget is 1% of the GDP. And this red line is a much more accurate reflection of the evolution of the Common Agricultural Policy. A downward trend over the years, so it's not new. That is roughly 1.7% if you look at it over the years, which is almost half of the rate of decline of farmers. So on a per farm basis, farmers are not losing. It's a reflection of the lower importance of agriculture as an economic sector. It's 2% of the economy now. But it's not a reflection of a lower importance of agriculture as a sector that addresses the 100%, which is the food demand, and the 50%, which is land use. In fact, on land use, there is much more importance on agriculture in the future. And then I'm not going to go in details. You have in red the number, the evolution of market measures, which are very minimal now. In blue, you have couple support. In green, the various levels of decoupled support, and in amber, the agro-environmental measures and rural development measures. What's important is what is proposed in the future. This blue line is the current Common Agricultural Policy without the United Kingdom. So you subtract the budget that goes to the United Kingdom, and you see what the budget of the Common Agricultural Policy would have been had we not had the cut in the budget, which shows then where we are with the cut in the budget. You can say the cap is full or empty. The cap is almost full, but it's not as full as it used to be in the past. This is an exogenous impact of the Common Agricultural Policy, which we that deal with the Common Agricultural Policy have to take it as what it is, and then have to see what we can do best around it. So the next slide is the one that is much more interesting for you, is how do we distribute this among member states. So what we have done is we have looked at this average of the European Union, which is expressed on a per hectare basis, and we have cut by 3.9% all the direct payments of all member states. And then we went to those that are below the 90%, and we increase it by half to 2026. I have no doubt that we're going to have a very strong discussion about that. And I'm prepared about that. But what I'm saying is that, and that is the point that I would like to bring as a reminder here, because there have been things that have been written out there that start from a wrong point. How did we first calculate the per hectare payment for all member states? In the same way. So why is it different, you would say? Because we took the intervention price at the European level, some years before we started with the 92 reform, that was the same in all member states. But guess what? The yields were not the same. In cereals, we had yields of 2 tons per hectare and yields of 11 tons per hectare. By the way, nobody then doubted about the C of the CAP with the one intervention price, which was in nominal terms the same year after year after year. So we made this calculation, and we compensated part of the loss in different ways in different sectors, and converted it, multiplied the hectares or the animals, and then converted into hectares, times the yield. And that's why you have these differences. So they are a reflection of old gaps in productivity that, in the meantime, have been complicated by other factors. You see my compatriots out there, Greece, they were much lower last time around. What happened is there are grazing lands, pastoral lands that have stayed out of the system because of definition and others. So there is land abandonment. In you and other Baltic states, you have exactly the opposite. You started with a higher point, and because new land came in with a fixed budget, the average went down. So every member state has a different explanation for that. What we can do is focus on a gradual adaptation that bridges this gap. But this cannot happen in total abstraction of what is happening on the economy, on the fact that wages are different, the overall economic situation is different, land prices are different, and clearly this will come with further questions, and I'll be glad to try to see whether I can convince you more or not afterwards. But that is what I wanted to stress here, is this is how we did the calculation. Now, another important element here, because the calculation and the debate about convergence has to do with objectives. And please take a very close look to that, because this is totally new. For years, we have been criticized either for having too many objectives or not linking them with what we were doing. What you see on top are the broader CAP objectives. You can look at the names we use now, and I would be very much interested to see how the foster, bolster, and strengthen has been translated, because translation of what we do in English and commission English in other languages is anybody's guess. But what I want to stress is the broader objectives of the CAP. You can find them with different names, but you find them reflecting the same thing: a broad economic, a broad environmental, and a broad social objective. And this is not changing. The wording is changing. What is totally new is the introduction of specific objectives. And please keep in mind to that, because we have economic, environmental and climate, and social objectives. One journalist said, "Why do you have arrows?" I changed them in the English version. They mean absolutely nothing. I can give you afterwards the change there's no priority of one over the other. But the economic ones are income related, competitiveness related, and food chain related, a rebalancing in the food chain. So the element that is linked to the convergence is only one of the 3 economic objectives. And then you had 3 in broader environmental, 1 on the environment, 1 on climate, and 1 on landscape and biodiversity, and 3 social objectives, which is a generational renewal, clearly a challenge for agriculture, which is vibrant rural areas, the jobs and growth element that links with other type of policies, and something also new, the link of food with health, animal and human health. And there you find the only new indicator in the list of indicators we have, which we cut by more than half: the use of antibiotics in animal feed and the need to reduce it, which has a positive impact on animal health, a positive impact on animal welfare because there is a reflection of better animal welfare, and obviously a positive impact on human health. And then we have the cross-cutting objectives of sustainability, which has these three elements of modernization and simplification. Keep that in mind. I'm not going to go into any details on the impact assessment. We have them. It's as long and thick as the legal proposals. And I published something of that if anybody is interested, a very brief summary of what we have done. But I raise this issue because when we assess the different options about what we're going to do in the Common Agricultural Policy, if you put equal weights on the economic, environmental, and social aspects, you come with a different assessment of the options than if you actually use the weights that reflect the member state choices, where they put much more emphasis on the economic aspect than the social one. Now, why do we want to do that? To strengthen the environmental and climate action, to actually better target support, and to rely more on knowledge, innovation, and technology. From all this, I want to focus on the element of the link of objectives to the strategic plans of member states. Member states, based on their needs, have to develop what they think they have to do. We don't tell you from Brussels that you have to do crop rotation and it has to be 3 crops. We tell you from Brussels that you have to address soil erosion, emissions, biodiversity, or water issues, and you find what is the best way of doing it on the basis of a list of objectives that are identified in Europe. In the redistribution of support, what is important is not only what happens among member states, but within member states, where there is much more flexibility among member states to take into account differences in sectors, in regional areas, and also in the fact that agricultural income is not only affected by direct payments or by markets, but also by taxation, which is a national responsibility, by pension schemes, which are national, by inheritance laws, which are national, by state aid rules on renewables, which are national, and so forth. And on knowledge, innovation, and technology, extremely important to have functioning farm advisory systems, and even more important to have a transfer of knowledge and best practices, not only within, but among member states. So the innovation partnerships are real EU partnerships and not the partnerships about those that they know. Now, in very summary terms, with blue, what we do at the EU level, which is we set the 9 specific objectives, a set of common indicators, all are existing. They're less than half of what you have to do today. So we did a lot to clean and keep the ones that are available, but they're much more important because people have to deliver on this. And the broad types of intervention are also in the Basic Act, in the EU legal text. And what member states do is they identify their specific needs, they set up strategic plans that tailor these interventions to their needs, and the implementation and the progress towards targets is also monitored by member states. And from the next graph, the top levels, common objectives, this is new. Indicators and types of interventions are not really new, a couple are. The assurance and the monitoring process exists today. The assurance is called compliance, but the elements are there. The new element is the last one. It's a policy performance. And it's very important because that's the entry point of the judgment of the Common Agricultural Policy. Yes, this will happen 6 or 7 years from today. But it is extremely important to start thinking about this assessment of the policy today, because the future of the Common Agricultural Policy depends on how today we will clarify what are the broad objectives we have to achieve and how we're going to do that. In this type of objectives, we don't have quantitative targets, but in the objectives that member states are going to set, member states will have to set quantitative targets. If I find the time, I'll try to simplify this, but this is, on the left is what we have today, the mandatory cross-compliance, the also mandatory greening elements, and the voluntary agro-environmental measures in the second pillar. Another way of interpreting the bottom is 100% of area greening is 70% of area at the EU level, aggregate level, and the agro-environmental measures is 25% of the area. What you have with the new system is we bring together the cross-compliance and greening into conditionality. I don't know how this has been translated in Lithuanian and if it's an accurate term, because in different member states we got some question marks. But it means that the level of ambition on both climate and environment increases. It applies to everybody and it applies to all land. And this is extremely important. What is also important is there is much more flexibility at the manner by which both agro-environmental measures apply, but eco schemes. What are these eco schemes? These are moves from a conventional type of agriculture to a more environmentally friendly type of agriculture. And we don't want to prejudge what they are going to be, because there can be integrated pest management, precision farming, new breeding techniques that reduce emissions. It could be something that we don't know what it is today, and somebody discovers tomorrow. And this is why it's important to allow this flexibility to member states to address these schemes, and they have also the flexibility to decide whether to do it in the first pillar or in the second pillar with a shift of up to 15% of the money, but it's not co-financed. It's financed only by the EU budget. And there is also a possibility of shifting money from the first to the second pillar to address these issues. I want to, there are 3 more slides, but I want only to briefly summarize with what for sustainable, simpler, and modern is the slogans. I'm not going to go into the detail on that, except to stress one thing. We cannot simplify the CAP if we don't modernize. And we cannot modernize if we don't understand that we're living in a digital economy, and in this digital economy we have enormous opportunities. In a previous meeting I was mentioning before, Canadians, Chinese, private firms are using Sentinel-2, the European satellites, financed by European taxpayers, that are at the frontier of technology in terms of imaging that comes from space, and they provide information for free. And we better start using this available information everywhere in the European Union and not selectively, and better find ways of making this information translatable and applicable to farmers. These softwares exist, they are available. People don't necessarily know it, and that's why we have to stress. The next type of issues is redistribution, targeting, and convergence. Convergence is also internal. And in internal convergence, there is a possibility of cutting payments above 60,000 euros and after 100,000 completely. There is also a possibility of putting an upper limit to hectares. There is a focus on having 40% of payments linked one way or the other to climate action. And then, what is the last one? The last one is generation renewal, vibrant rural areas, food, health, and animal welfare. And I think this is also, especially the last one, requires us to move out from the narrow space of the manner in which we see the common agricultural policy as a policy that relates to how much money we have and how we share it among ourselves, member states, farmers, sectors, or what have you, first and second pillar, and start realizing that there is a society out there that expects from the food sector many things. Many of these things are already available from the food sector and from agriculture, and people don't necessarily know them. But there are some other things that are new. And we have to focus specifically on how to address this type of issues. Antimicrobial resistance, for example, is a challenge that everybody would tell you we have to do something about. And this is why you saw it coming so strongly with the the discussion of the indicators and the targets we have. I covered a lot of space. There's a lot of background document in these links, which have links to other type of links. There is a very dense and long impact assessment that we gradually will start presenting in the various parts. I'm pretty sure that I answered some question and probably generated even more, and I'll be glad to be able to see what Rolandas would have to criticize me for, and also what type of questions you will have. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tassos, for this very comprehensive and detailed analysis and presentation, of course, which gave us a very global picture on the challenges faced in the future by agricultural sector in terms of environment and climate change and science and innovation, but also giving a much more broad historical overview how the policy has evolved as well as the financing of it. And as you've said, now we will turn to Lithuanian view. Ir čia norėčiau pakviesti Rolandą.
Now I would like to invite advisor to the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Taraškevičius, to provide his reaction to the presentation and share his ideas. The floor is yours. Good morning. I have the feeling of déjà vu. I remember our last meeting, which took place in January, when we shared our insights regarding the communication of the European Commission on the same topic, and we were looking forward to the legislative proposals regarding the Common Agricultural Policy and Multi-Annual Financial Framework. And to quote and rephrase one of our famous sportsmen and a character in a cartoon, famous cartoon, I would like to say the following. We were waiting for this moment, and finally the moment has arrived. We have a bunch of documents in front of us on our desks. I didn't even dare to bring it all to this meeting to show you. Tassos has a small impact assessment bunch only, but we also have other piles of documents that are related to the process. We are at the beginning of a legislative process only, and compared to basketball, Tassos likes basketball a lot, and when Lithuania and Greece are playing in a match, we often exchange our opinions about the way they're doing with Tassos. So now I have a feeling that we are playing on the same basketball field, but we have several balls that we play with, and the balls are of different sizes. Some of them are not basketball balls at all. Some of them are used in rugby courts and somewhere else. And there are different rules that we play by, for example, NBA rules and other rules. Therefore, our common goal should be to talk about common rules that we should abide by when playing on the basketball or in the basketball field. The most important thing is to continue playing basketball and using the same rules. We, the government of Lithuania, are now getting acquainted with the new policy proposal. This particular event is also meant to learn more about what is awaiting for us in the future. Next week on Monday, ministers of agriculture of all EU member states will have a meeting with Commissioner Hogan, and they will listen to his presentation. Similar presentations already took place at the European Parliament, and this is the second major reform of common agricultural policy, and this is a joint decision-making procedure, so to say. The ball is now in the hands of the European member states and the European Parliament. There is one more important and interesting component, which is not a secret anymore. Tassos has already mentioned that one of the priority areas for Lithuania as well is fair playing field and convergence, external convergence. This particular element is related to the negotiations regarding the multi-annual financial framework and all the future debates that are awaiting for us. What concerns all the legislative proposals, certainly there are regulations that include specific figures, and also there are separate financial envelopes that also include certain particular financial information and what concerns transparency and clarity. All these things are really important. And negotiations that will have to lead to the redistribution of the contents of financial envelopes. And the environment for those negotiations is not that favorable. Of course, it has already been mentioned that there are different calculations with regard to the increase or decrease of budgets, depending on whether we speak about current prices or constant prices. And I do see some initial reactions from other member states saying that agriculture is about to receive more money and the agricultural sector should be happy about that, but I'm telling them that we are not getting more money and we are not happy, actually, because the task of convergence is an ongoing task. And the ambitions that we have in the field are not sufficient if we follow the proposal of the European Commission. If the proposal comes into force tomorrow, by the end of the financing period, Lithuania would be lagging behind by the EU average by 80%, and that is not acceptable. This is why we will have to continue negotiating and discussing the proposed things. Of course, we do understand that Brexit and the withdrawal of the United Kingdom will also have its toll on the EU budget. We are not quite happy about the fact that the Commission decided to distribute the burden of Brexit equally among all EU member states and reduces the financial envelopes equally, and then based on that continues calculating all other things, convergence including. The Baltic countries are lagging behind the average of direct payments in the EU, and we think that they should be removed from this procedure, because every time we talk about an increase or a decrease of a budget, we calculate this element in a different way. We compare the current financial budget with the future financial budget, be it current prices or constant prices. The European Commission has a different way to calculate it. They take the very last years from the budget, then they subtract Brexit, and then they can compare it with the future multi-annual financial framework. This is why they get different figures, because the calculation procedure differs, but these are only figures, numbers, and we are not happy about the overall trend as such. A few more words about the presentation made by Tassos. We are now talking about simplification and modernization of the common agricultural policy. Don't know what was your impression about the content of the presentation, but we had a lot of information. We saw a lot of slides, but the whole procedure doesn't seem that simple. We are happy about the fact that the architecture of the policy will remain the same. The basic elements of the policy will remain the same. Of course, there will be some renaming to be done. Certain objectives will change, but the overall architecture will remain the same. Of course, there will be a greater synergy between different pillars, and this is very clear. The former direct payment regulation will be dropped, and both pillars will be actually joined under one dome, so to say, and the first pillar will have to deal with greater programming actions focused on the result. Of course, we do see all the layers. We do see the baseline. The baseline is being set at a higher level, and the farmers will have to undertake certain greater amount of necessary actions in order to get the support, and Tassos also mentioned that. And we will note this for the future. We also see that there will be a possibility to transfer some of the appropriations from one pillar to another pillar, and there will be possibilities to eliminate co-financing in some cases, and especially in cases when we speak about environmentally friendly measures. The reduction of the European component, of the European part, is also clear, and we see that Lithuania is being attributed to the fully developed countries. This means that this will result in a big burden to the national budget. Now, depending on the measure, 85% will be contributed by the European Union. Sorry, used to be contributed by the European Union, the rest by the national country, by the member state, and now this percentage will be much lower, 43% by the EU, and the bigger part by the national budget. But a lot depends on the national budgets of every single member state. We do not see such kind of possibilities in our national budget. Of course, the scheme for young farmers is very important for Lithuania. We do see that we have a possibility to simplify the scheme for farmers here, young farmers, and we are very happy about that. Of course, we can apply all these elements. Lithuania opted out of them some time ago, but we will have to look at the modality. We will have to analyze the situation, but we see that the structure in general is suitable for us. A greater role will be placed on hedging. And Tassos also mentioned the situation with the climate change and extreme weather conditions, and we also experienced some extreme weather conditions last year. Last year we had a lot of floods and lots of rain, and this year we have a very different situation because of drought, lack of rain, and hedging is extremely important in terms of the future multi-annual financial framework and the future common agricultural policy. Tassos didn't mention that, but there are also other suggestions, for example, related to common market and organization of the common market, which will also be very important for Lithuania to negotiate about. We will have to negotiate the safety net and the measures included in the safety net and their role. We also have the horizontal regulation that sets common principles to apply in our policy, and there are all kinds of other elements related to crisis and extreme weather conditions. Of course, the element of nature takes a greater amount of the agricultural budget as well. And of course, we will have to negotiate on how to implement the green architecture within the framework of both pillars. From the current point of view, we see that the process will be rather complex and will take a lot of time. There will be a lot of negotiating parties sitting down at a round table to negotiate. We, as a member state, would opt for the quality of process and the result. And we would not be in favor of speeding up the process. We do understand that if we are too late in taking the right decisions, it's not good either, especially in terms of continuity of certain policy elements. And we had a similar situation within the framework of the current multi-annual financial framework. And we, as the country which presided over the EU, also had a chance to cooperate, to negotiate some transitory measures and elements. Quite a number of member states already back in 2015 as late as 2015, didn't have all the necessary programs approved, and they were late with the implementation of the elements related to direct payments. Databases were not replaced and changed in due time. And of course, for our farmers, it is extremely important to know that there will be continuity, that they can actually predict what will happen, that the size of the payments is predictable, and so on and so forth. Lithuania, we would always manage to take care of the advance payments related to direct payments and take care of all the necessary systems. What concerns the future implementation and delivery model, of course, there are more questions than answers at the time being related to that. And certainly there will be all kinds of working groups and impact assessment presentations done. We, together with other member states, will have to continue working in the field, and these are just initial insights, and we do not have so much of enthusiasm in terms of what needs to be done. That would be it for the time being.
Labai ačiū tikrai už labai irgi.
Thank you very much for such an in-depth analysis of Lithuanian position and expectations on behalf of Lithuanian farmers. Let us open the floor for discussion. We have Lithuanian English interpreting, so please use the language which is more in which you are more comfortable to speak. And also, this event is being web streamed, so please introduce yourself before you ask a question. Also, all the slides that were used by Tassos and all other information will be placed on our website. So please visit our website. Shall we start the discussion? And please bring the microphone to Mr. Stančikas. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andrėjus Stančikas, the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture. The presentation was very interesting, but it raised a lot of questions that were also stemming from the previous debates on the same issues. Please, if you could please show us page 13 from the slide, the table, because I saw some figures of interest on that slide. Table 13, 1-3. No, it seems it is 12. Yes, this is the graph I wanted to discuss. Also, sorry for my mistake. So let us have a look. Let's look where the Baltic states are represented here. If we look back at the history of the European Union, we've always been in this place. And the question is why? Why the policy of payments is such as the Baltic countries could get very small direct payments? Usually, it can be explained by the low price of land, by the cheap labor, and things like that. Yes, at least these arguments are presented by other larger member states. But let us look at the consequences of such approach. Indeed, it results in distorted competition. Let us look at the salary level at the countries which are on the left of this graph and the salary level at the right of this graph. Well, that explains all the differences. Also, in Lithuania, we are facing very high levels of migration. The reasons are the same. Basically, the amounts that the state invested into education of our people, all these amounts are now basically exported to other countries, to other member states, and maybe even Japan. Of course, people are looking for better salaries and for better working conditions, but this situation exists in agriculture as well. So again, let's go back to Lithuania. Lithuania is now facing huge demographic challenges. We now even experience a lack of resources to address all the social issues, because all the young people who leave for other countries, they pay taxes there. And their contribution does not exist, at least for Lithuania. Perhaps it would be good if part of the taxes that are paid by the migrants in other member states could be paid back to Lithuania. But everyone smiles at this proposal. They believe this is not possible. But as a result, in order to address social problems in Lithuania, we need money. We need to increase taxes. And that is a burden that will increase on both employees in other sectors and employees in agriculture. If these trends continue, and I mean if migration continues to grow, basically migration is growing very fast, and it only encumbers, it only makes our problems bigger. And what we see now? We see now that the new policy is oriented towards leaving us at the very end of the table. And talking about the risk management or the crisis fund and also the links with the climate change, environmental impact of the climate change. It seems that Europe should have a budget to compensate for these losses which are related to climate and extreme. What happens if, let's say, we just cut the part that is above the European average, which is above that average line, and invest these monies or allocate these monies to other countries which are behind the line or below the line? Nobody asks for more money, but I think this is the way how we could balance the situation. And farmers do not ask for more money. They ask for the money to be distributed more equally. So these are my thoughts, and if you could respond to that, I would be very grateful.
Thank you very much for the comments that you made. I knew that we were going to discuss that, but I wanted to discuss also the broader picture of the Common Agricultural Policy, not just one of the 9 objectives it has. Because that's why I didn't prepare other type of things. I think focusing on the income situation of farming and the fairness of the Common Agricultural Policy by looking only at this graph is simply distorting the picture. I'm not saying that it's not an element of the debate, but it is not the only element of the debate. And I think we need to keep some things in mind. If you were to change this graph into a graph on a per farmer allocation of the support, you would have seen a very different picture. If you were to compare the average income, and all these graphs, by the way, are available, and I'll be glad to send them back to you, the average income per farmer in the European Union, and compare it to the average opportunity cost of labor outside agriculture, which is the average wage, you will see a very different picture. And why is this important? Because forgetting what direct payments are all about, we miss the picture of what we can do to improve the situation. Direct payments are a safety net for farm income that replaces the support of products with high intervention prices that didn't cost anything to the taxpayer, but cost enormously to the consumer, both the European and the consumer in the rest of the world. And this is something that you didn't see because Lithuania was not part of the European Union at the time, that we saw clearly in what was happening. What we saw was overproduction. What we saw was the export with subsidies. That was the previous graph, the red part, that was criticized by everybody, and no real debate about the budget until the moment where we started having all these stocks of intervention that we didn't know what to do with it. So when we moved away from the system into something that's much more transparent, we have to look at all these elements of this transparency. So the notion is we provide a safety net for farmers, but the biggest part of their income comes from the market. So it's only a part of this income. If we were to do what you suggest, which means that we bring everybody at the same level on a per hectare payment, the first thing you would see is something very interesting. You would see a very significant decline of the share of income of farmers coming from direct payments for those above, and you were going to see a very significant increase of the share of income coming from direct payments of those below. But what you wouldn't see at all is immediately the impact of this move onto issues like competitiveness of agriculture, the migration of labor, and other areas. And that's why the big picture counts. Every part of the world you look at that has a market economy, you're going to find differences among individuals participating in the market. The role of public policy is to identify how many of these differences are driven by market failures and by policy failures and correct them. So let's see where are the market and the policy failures. You mentioned climate change and specific climatic conditions in Lithuania. There are specific climatic conditions in Lithuania. There are specific climatic conditions everywhere. The European Union has broadly 4 different climatic zones. There is not a single one that doesn't face climate change challenges. Even the most productive ones right now are facing an extreme increase of animal or plant diseases because the average increase of temperature. Others are facing increasing risk of water availability or drought. So there is no part of the European Union, in fact, there is no part of this planet that doesn't have to face challenges linked to climate. What does this mean? It means that the costs have to be clearly calculated, and they're not reflected in this graph. And it means that the solutions have to be local and driven by the needs. And that's why flexibility on member states is very important. Second, the cost of production is linked to labor, and not only the labor employed and paid in agriculture, the opportunity cost of labor, the average wage rate. What would happen to the agricultural sector if, while the rest of the economy is moving its own path of adjustment, there is a very rapid adjustment of an increase in payments in agriculture? You would have a stop in structural adjustment. If you look at the characteristics of your economy and the characteristics of all the European economy, the agricultural sector is a very small part. Out-migration from Lithuania, or from my country, by the way, is not mainly driven by the agricultural sector. It's driven by the overall developments of the economy. And it would be wrong to focus on and try to provide a solution to broader problems of cohesion and convergence in the European Union economy by focusing on the smaller part of the sector. It's not going to give us magical solutions. There is a very important issue of land. Everybody is criticizing direct payments for the impact of land prices without even looking at the impact of land prices. Well, the biggest impact of direct payments on land prices has been in new member states because it didn't have the previous level of support that the older member states had. So if you double payments, what do you expect will happen in land prices? It's going to be capitalized immediately. And that will raise an issue of who gets what. An issue that is also much linked on who is a farmer, and a genuine farmer, where it has to be a national responsibility because of reasons I mentioned before. There is an issue of the technology, but the most important issue for me that we miss in this debate is the fact of what we want to do about the agricultural sector in the future, not of the Lithuania only, of the European Union agriculture. Europe, everywhere, in all sectors, will not be able to compete on costs, because the costs of production are lower elsewhere. I mean, you can compare costs among different member states, they're different, but if you compare our costs with everybody else, we are on a weak spot, because our agriculture, our land size is smaller, and our standards are higher. So the way out for this is to turn our competitive disadvantage into a competitive advantage. And that we cannot do if we focus on the costs and what distinguishes us. We can do if we focus on what is our advantage, which is knowledge-based agriculture, the generation of new technologies, and value added on what characterizes European products. This is what has provided the European food sector with something that is tangible and seen by facts. And it is a rather outward looking into producing products of value added that can do something in export markets. And this is why, for the debate about the future of the common agricultural policy, an accurate assessment of the fairness or lack of fairness of the manner by which we distribute the money should take into account many more factors. We tried to do this exercise in the previous impact assessment. We looked in 20 different combinations of weights between the economic, the environmental, and the social aspects of agriculture. In all of them, clearly what is coming out is that the Baltic states have to get more. There is no, I have no doubt about that. But what also comes out is that there has to be a path of adjustment that is not abrupt and that takes into account the overall developments of the economy. Because otherwise, what you see as an improvement in this particular slide will get into a disadvantage and a worsening of the situation in at least 3 or 4 other slides that reflect other economic factors.
Many thanks. There is a question here in the front, and then we'll take another one here.
Labą dieną.
Algis Baravykas from Lithuanian Chamber of Agriculture and Director of Pig Growers Association. We are representatives of basketball countries and specialists of agriculture at the same time. So you know very well that sometimes we have a very good player, but he is sitting on the backbench. And if he continues sitting on the backbench, he degrades, he loses the skills. And if he loses the skills, he earns less. And if he earns less, again, he is sent to the backbench. So we feel like those good players. We try to play more, but we are not allowed to. You said that, well, you showed a lot of tables and graphs here, but the results are as follows. When we go to other countries in the West, we see a very different picture from ours. There are, well, certain conditions that are the same. We have the same problem, for example, with antimicrobial resistance, but there, farmers are building their farms and they're increasing their animal numbers. And when it turns out, well, and this determines the fact that these member states are earning more. When they're earning more, they need more machinery, they need more investments, and this is where all the economic development takes place. Meanwhile, in our country, from the moment we joined the EU, the number of livestock has decreased, and so did our income per hectare. We stopped growing livestock, we stopped growing crops, and our income has started reducing. And talking about the common agricultural policy, we should really try to make it common and to prevent these differences from happening, or these processes from happening. And that's why I call upon the European Commission to take into account different aspects. Climate change is not local. Climate change results from volcano eruptions all over the world. And volcano eruption in one part of the world has impacts on our country. As a result, well, we are introducing measures to reduce the emissions. And our emissions are less than in Germany or in other large EU member states. We have to comply with the same requirements, although our emissions are much lower. Antimicrobial resistance in our countries is 15 milligrams per life weight. But in the southern European countries, it is up to 300 milligrams per life weight. So these differences are huge, and I think they have to be taken on board. They have to be taken into account. And should the support to the Baltic countries be greater, perhaps we would become more self-sufficient and be able to contribute to the combating of climate change, and we would create a more equal Europe. Another question. Good morning. Imantas Pranauskas, Association of Agricultural Companies. Well, you drew analogies with sports, and I am a fan of mathematics. There used to be one wise man, and perhaps you have heard about the Achilles and a turtle. Achilles runs faster than a turtle, and it seems that Achilles, that the turtle, and you know this paradox. You know the paradox which says that Achilles will never catch up with the turtle, who is moving one step at a time, but he is still moving. So, in 2013, we expected that the payments for the new and old EU member states will be the same. However, according to the calculations, it turns out that 144 is equal to 260 in 2013. In 2014, the Council of Ministers says that the lowest income should be 196. But now we see that the lowest income, or the minimal income, will be only a little bit above 170 euros. So basically, according to the new formula, our payments will increase from 196 to 203. But this is the arithmetics, and if Achilles is faster than turtle, he should catch up with the turtle at some point in time. Let's make up our minds regarding the level of payments.
With some counter-arguments to see, because I need to stress once more that however valid certain elements of this debate are, there are other things. I have it. Yeah. Well, it's this. Yeah. There are certain other elements that also need to be taken into account. Let's make an assumption for a moment. Assume that everybody in this graph was getting the same per hectare. Please raise your hands, those that honestly believe that the income of Lithuanian farmers was going to be the same with the farmers of the rest of the member states. And you know very well that it wouldn't be. Exactly because the income of the farming sector, it's not a direct function of direct payments, but it is influenced by direct payments. If we were to take all the level of decoupled support, all, and turn it into coupled support, do you think that Lithuania would be faring better? It wouldn't, for a very simple reason, because the yields are lower. And this is why there are elements that are objective in the agricultural sector, they might be technical, but they're serious and affect the capacity of a sector to perform. And we cannot underestimate what is going to happen in other areas. The same thing would apply if we were to listen to some that say that the only money for the CAP should be for the public delivery of the public good and not the private good. I've been on on many occasions claiming that we have to do both, because there are failures of in markets for the private good as well. But assume that the payment was based only on the public good, and we were to take into account soil conditions, water, air, and biodiversity. Who do you think would get most of the money on this objective criteria? So we have to realize that we're living in a world that is diverse and that has diverse parameters that have to be taken into account. We also have to realize that we're living in the world that we're not starting from scratch. We did the exercise from scratch. Last time around, we offered possibilities to member states if they wanted to make a choice within member states where we don't have a control. There are member states that are much bigger than Lithuania and have a much more diverse agriculture than Lithuania, where the debate about external convergence for them is a debate about internal convergence. Have you seen any of them coming up? There is one that went into a flat rate with a clear impact on land prices, but if you look at the differences of income among farmers, you're going to have clearly an impact, and you're going to have clearly an impact of national subsidies on renewables. The member states that rely, you mentioned also an increase in production on some of them, on livestock. Those that rely more on livestock production have the highest debt to asset ratio, and are the most vulnerable to any changes on this type of branches. And what I'm raising with this is once more the same issue. There is a clear direction of convergence. But this direction of convergence has to take into account the impact of convergence on other factors that are relevant. And if in agriculture we forget that the opportunity cost of land and labor are relevant, we're going to miss a very important point which is linked to the competitiveness of every agricultural sector. You develop your own strategy. It's not the Commission that tells Lithuania or any member state develop this strategy. But any product you decide to develop and make it competitive would have to pass through this exercise. What is the impact of this particular or other choice here, there, and elsewhere? And what is here, there, and elsewhere? Land, labor, capital investment, technology, and the markets at which the product that is going to be produced has to be sold. And I've seen a lot in the history of the CAP, and I've seen part of the debate that you have. And what I find very interesting with this World Bank study I mentioned is that it has a transformation curve. They put dots, didn't put the names of the member states. But you see in this transformation curve the different stages that member states find themselves. We also find the CAP in a different stage. When the CAP started, and even my country was not part of the Union in the 60s, 62. It was a cap that was driven by product considerations. It was a cap of the 2%, the 2% of the economy. Then it was 10% of agriculture, but still was a small sector. This cap took a full generation, 30 years to close its cycle, and we moved into 92 into what was a cap of the 100%, if you want, the demand-driven cap. Demand in the beginning from the outside world that wanted us to stop dumping our surpluses with export subsidies. And then it moved into much more focus on food safety and food quality because of the various food crises we had. And that was driven by consumer concerns. This cap is also completing its cycle. And where we're moving into a much more complex policy in terms of objectives, but a much more necessary step. Because that's, well, I like to call it the 50%, roughly it's the same in every member state. It's land use, and the impact that land use is going to have on environment and climate action. And this affects everything. It affects the income of farmers, it affects the products we're going to produce, the footprint these products are going to have, but above all, it affects the justification that the common agricultural policy is going to have in the future. This is what people expect us to do. And by expecting us to do that, they don't only expect us to look at what is going to happen on the income of farmers and where it's coming from, but how we're going to be able to deliver in all 9 of these objectives. You mentioned one, antimicrobial resistance. And there is another point that I haven't mentioned that we have forgotten in this debate. We tried to present it in the conference that we did after the public consultation last July. And the graphs are interesting. We speak about average and say this is the average among member states. Within member states, the higher, the larger the farm, the lower the direct payment per hectare. The larger the farm, the higher the dependence on direct payments. The larger the farm, the lower the income per agricultural working unit. This is a structural characteristic that cuts across all member states and points out to very significant challenges that we'll have to face in terms of structural adjustment. And these challenges need to have as a parameter clearly the distribution of support within and among member states. That's why we spoke about per targeting, but they should not have as the only parameter this. That's the only point I'm trying to make here.
Thank you, Tassos. We still have about half an hour, so let's hear from some other people. Paimkime keletą daugiau klausimų. Prašau.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm chairman of the Lithuanian Farmers Association and Union, and I'm really interested in environmental protection, and I'm really very happy about the increase of support for environmental protection. But at the same time, I would like to have a look at it from a different point of view. The European Commission and the European Parliament allows one very strange thing, that is, allows importing from third countries, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, products. And the active substances that are being used there, they are not allowed for use here in Lithuania. And by allowing these products onto the European market with some very dangerous materials actually are being sold on the EU market, and the European Commission doesn't do anything about it and even promotes the import of such products from third countries. So what do you have to say about that? We are now doing our best to protect our environment. We're using very, very expensive protection measures for our plants and for our environment, but at the same time we easily allow third countries to import products that are grown by using very aggressive protection measures. Any other questions? Good morning. I'm the president of Dairy Company Association. I would like to ask the following question. We are members of the European Union. When we just became members of the European Union, we had a different level of production, milk production, dairy production. We are not growing flax anymore. We are producing less pork. We are getting rid of our cows, dairy cows, with time. And I see that 76,000 of dairy cows will be exported to Poland, and you see that Russians already import grain to Lithuania. They grow 130 million tons. So similar situation is with the Ukraine. So what is waiting for us in the future? I think that the common agricultural policy is the biggest pain, or the most painful measure for our farmers. All the environmental requirements and the rest are the requirements set by the European Union. But actually the payments that are allocated for us are really very, very small. You say that nothing will change if the payments change, but let's try and pay similar amounts to Germans or somebody else. We have the smallest direct payments, we have the smallest raw milk price, so what is awaiting for us in the future? I'm a member of the International Milk Council, and the Danes are saying, oh, we're so happy that you are in the EU. We really value your people from Lithuania who come to work in our farms. But what will happen to Lithuanian farms if we continue with this policy? Of course, we are changing the names. We are calling it all kinds of fancy names, but this results in the destruction of our agriculture, local villages and local agriculture here in Lithuania. So dark night is awaiting for us in the future. Thank you very much. Director of the Association of Agricultural Policies, Sederskis. We did listen very carefully to Juncker's and Hogan's presentations, and both of them promised that during the new multi-annual financial framework, Lithuania will not be considered as a second-sort country or lower level country, but this particular common agricultural policy shows that this is not the case. And we are being explained by the European Union that things will change for the better, but we see now that the big farms and the small farms are being made enemies. You want to make it a more competitive farm, you want to make it a job-creating farm. You also want to support the introduction of all kinds of innovations. Of course, we do need to support small and medium-sized farms, but we have to differentiate between farms that need social support and also farms that are creating jobs, bigger farms that are creating jobs and doing good for other people. And they are working, for example, 7 days a week instead of 5 days a week and so on. So my question is as follows. Why do you continue reducing direct payments to us? And why do you introduce the cap, for example, for payments, even though you say you want to support the good things? You also say that our labor is cheap, that our land is cheap, but this is not quite the case. It's just that we are only now buying back our land, and the rest of the older European Union countries, they already have their land back. And of course, we do pay the salaries, we do pay social insurance and income taxes, and all those sums, they also have to be added up in addition to the land tax.
Questions? If you'd like to respond.
The first question, well, there are elements, most of the elements that you raised are related to what is actually our colleagues in DG Santé is doing. But we need to draw a line between what the Commission is developing and what Member States decide. What the Commission tries to do is rely more on science in terms of assessing what type of substances are safe or are not safe. And there's a different thing in safety when it applies to what you produce, because they have side effects on the environment, not only on human health, and what is allowed to be produced elsewhere. It is clear that we don't have a control on the environmental standards of third parties, but it is clear that we have a total control on what we accept in the internal market in terms of food safety and human safety. So what comes in has, in terms of the impact on consumers, have to have the same effect. So we need to draw this distinction. Most of what you're saying in terms of a potential impact is advantages on cost of production that producers have in third countries, but it's not in terms of the safety of the consumer. Otherwise, we wouldn't be importing it. And in this particular issue, we do have something that in Europe we need to address, which is the manner by which we assess the risks and benefits of science. And the best way to see it is not only in the debate we have in agriculture, it's a debate we start having in other areas of human health, like the vaccination of children. So we do really have an issue of how we address scientific progress and whether we are open or not to a certain degree of risk that comes with innovation. That's a debate that we have been having since the aftermath of the mad cow diseases, and I've seen this debate in the Commission in the area of agriculture for quite some time. So, I mean, you raise an issue that is valid, but an issue whose solution would only come if member states come up to a better weighing of these factors, and that requires also a better trust in the manner by which science develops its ideas. The second issue about the future, if one looks again at the big picture and not the specific picture, agriculture in Europe is not a sector that necessarily would be one that is problematic. Why? Because overall in the world, if anything, demand for food is going to grow much faster than its production, and more specifically, demand for high quality, high safety food grows much faster than its production. This is why, for me, the most important message to pass to farmers in the European Union, which I know is very difficult, because I'm doing a much easier job talking about what we can do than what farmers do on the ground, is to pass the message that there is future out there in food production and that Europe has a potential competitive advantage. But this requires a transformation of our agricultural sector and better synergies among farmers. Now, part of the problems, however, will have solutions that would have to be developed within member states. And you should not expect Brussels to give you an advice of how exactly you're going to solve these problems and what exactly you're going to produce. What we can do is provide a broad outlook about where we think things are going to go in world markets, and we'll be doing it, and I think pretty successfully over a number of years. Assess in full transparency our analysis, their assumptions, and be open to changes on that, and that we have been doing. But at the same time, provide more flexibility to member states to provide solutions about these things. Because, okay, it's nice to criticize, or it's easy sometimes to criticize what we have, but we have to look at the alternative. In the absence of a common agricultural policy, let's be clear, Europe is not going to suffer as Europe in terms of production. And we've seen it with many analyses. But this production would be very concentrated, with greater impact on the environment, and with abandonment of land in many parts of Europe. That would include Lithuania, it would include my country, and all the periphery of Europe. If our policy were going to be only environmental, we were going to produce miracles in certain parts and certain sectors. But again, there was going to be another sector, which is going to be in terms of land, the most important one, or would be left totally outside. And if the focus is only on how we better distribute direct payments, forgetting what we have to do in environment in other areas, we will also have partial solutions to some problems with more than others. So the difficulty we have, and it is a real difficulty, is trying to bring all these things together. At least we hope that this time around, with more flexibility in member states and more focus on the real needs of addressing these objectives, we might do better than last time, stressing once more the fact that we don't only have failures, we have very significant achievements over the years. And finally, on the big versus small and whether they're enemies. I think it's interesting that we don't have this debate when we talk about the delivery of public goods. There, on environmental issues, there is no limit on what people can absorb. What we try to do in this debate is give the possibility of taking into account labor in the calculation of the impact of capping. And that's not only labor that is paid, but it's also labor that is employed from family or other members. And it's member states that have this possibility of making this adjustment. I've lived this debate through all my career in the European Union. And it's a difficult one because this is very similar to this graph about the flat rate and whether you have to use one indicator to assess what you do. There are small farms that are efficient and small farms that are very inefficient. There are small farms that are very environmentally friendly and small farms that do a lot of damage. And there are big farms that also have this characteristic, being efficient or inefficient, environmentally friendly or damaging. It's not an issue of size. What is an issue of size, however, is the economies of scale and size. And there is an argument that people raise, which is driven more by a social fairness type of approach, which is when you have 1% of farms receiving 15% of payments, that creates a certain problem. So what can we do about it? Interestingly enough, in the debate, people now seem to be surprised by the fact that capping doesn't generate big savings. We always said that capping doesn't generate big savings. You didn't have to look at our proposal. You could have looked at all the analysis and all the statistics to realize that the impact of capping is not meant to address redistributional aspects. We have other means of doing that. Redistributive payments, ceilings per hectare and the rest. It is meant to address, at the EU level, something that is usually addressed with national taxation, which is have a differentiation in the manner by which payments apply as sizes increase. We do hope that by taking into account the cost of paid and unpaid labor, the impact on these farms will be mitigated. But at the same time, we also have to take into account the fact that people would still go up to 100,000 euros of payment. They're not going to lose this third part. It's the part after this that are going to be lost. And with all due respect, when we go and speak to the rest of the farmers, also the citizens, there is an issue why all these big amounts of money are needed. The only reflection that I can bring here is that there are different stakes involved in this debate of stakeholders, and everybody, if I can use the argument, is looking at their own stake and not the stake of the other in this debate sometimes.
Thank you, Tassos. Well, we have very few minutes remaining, so let's have very quick reactions. Right there. Štai ten, Jurgi, taip.
Ačiū, esu
Algis Gaižutis, Chairman of the Association of Forestry and Agricultural Landowners. We do not have much time. I have a brief question. What kind of role is there foreseen for the forestry sector in the common agricultural policy structure? Because there is only one point where forestry is being mentioned, but over 30% of the territory is covered with forests. And it is related directly to, forestry is related directly to climate change and environment. So what will you do in order to ensure a vibrant forestry sector? If we stop farming and we believe that greenhouse gases will go down, this is not true, actually. I would like to also add that we have feed from Brazil with genetically modified organisms, and they get easily onto the European market, and it is very difficult for farmers to compete then. Just like you said, we are competing for a healthy environment, but what we feed to our animals is not that healthy because it comes from third countries. And we forget that 40% of the food that is being produced is being wasted. So we invest into something what is later being thrown away. We have to bear this in mind. But actually, my question is about forestry sector, and what will you do in order to make sure that the 20 million owners of forests in Europe can be self-sufficient?
Galbūt,
Thank you. Is there any other question from those who didn't have a chance? And we need to ensure gender balance. Thank you very much. I have a question to Tassos from the world of science. Speaking about common agricultural policy and future guidelines, how much did you take into account the holistic approach? And especially having in mind the food system policy. And if we speak about food system policy, which is person-focused and focused on the well-being of a human being and going down to the common agricultural policy. Thank you. Is there something new that you want to ask about? Just one small question. Since we are about to stop our debate, we all want to share our positions. It is not always that we want to ask a question, we want to share our position. And our guest puts it all down and then gives his own answer. So my question is, what will you take back to the Commission out of this discussion, and what will you do on the basis of our debate back in the Commission? And is there some kind of hope to catch up with the average of the EU? And maybe you can promise at least something for this year, because we do have all kinds of promises from many years ago. So maybe you can promise something to us today and we will know what to expect. We will put it down for ourselves and we'll be waiting for it. Thank you.
Let me start with the last one. You know, I don't know, it's not a joke, it's a clear statement. What do you do with Greeks bearing gifts? Or you don't want them to bear promises either. But let me make one point clear. When the Commission made its proposal, we didn't make it without knowing what your position and the position of other, the Baltic states or Romania or Bulgaria has been. And at least Rolandas and I, we go back knowing each other many, many years, and he has made this statement many, many times in the past. So we took this into account, but we also took into account other positions and other impacts. So what you see is a proposal that is going to be negotiated, and the decision is not going to be taken by the Commission. The decision is going to be taken by member states, and it's not going to be taken in the agricultural sector. It's going to be taking into account the broader aspects. So it will take into account agriculture, it will take into account research, structural funds, and everything. So this is why you can be sure about one thing, that I'm going to bring back everything that we discuss here. And even if I don't dare to, you just took everything and taped it, so it was web streamed. So there is no doubt that this will go, but there is absolutely also no doubt that this is going to be part of a very difficult negotiation process. What I would like to give as a message here is that in this process, we come from different angles, both as institutions, it's a different thing, the Commission, the Council, or the Parliament, but also we come from different starting points in terms of our national backgrounds, our experiences, and what we propose. But the targets that we have, and that's what we stress, the targets that we developed in terms of the objectives that the CAP has to address are common targets. These are EU targets. And the success or the failure of the policy around these objectives is the success of the failure of the Union. And the union is a union of member states that have their own sovereign rights, that have put them together to achieve common things. And the common agricultural policy is one of these things that has been common for quite some time. And it is important to keep in mind that to keep it common, we need to make the necessary changes that will be able to convince that we can do that. That's why I put so much focus on other areas as well. Did we took a holistic approach? One of these two big things is 300 pages in the impact assessment. And yes, we took a holistic approach because we don't have, first of all, because we wanted to do it, and second, because even if we didn't want, we didn't have any choice. You have to take into account all the aspects. In the inter-service consultation, all the DGs were involved. In the public consultation, you saw what, how many participants we had. One area about the food system policy is that it came as a potential alternative solution, but food policies are regulatory policies, mainly. And when we put the question to those that came, what you need to do is change the CAP into a food policy, or agriculture and food policy, we ask clearly the question, fine, tell us, what exactly does this imply? I can tell you that the only concrete thing we got, and we put it on board, is on the antimicrobial resistance. This is an area where what we were told is clearly the CAP can do much more than what it's doing right now, and we did it. All the other areas are areas where we contribute in more indirect ways, and we're going to do it. And that comes back to issues that you raised, not only about forestry, but about waste. I don't know if it's 40, the number is being used, but whether it's 40% of waste everybody and everywhere, we need to see. One thing that is clear is that most of this waste is not coming at the primary sector. It's not even coming at the processing because they find out ways of making money out of it. It's coming at the retail sector. It's coming at the consumer level. So there is a lot of education that we have to do to address it. But using this waste for bioeconomy and using the waste of forestry, if you want, for bioeconomy, are areas that you're going to see addressed in the proposal. And there are measures and there are indicators that we added that link. There are two indicators on forestry and there are indicators on bioeconomy that try to point to member states to this, the opportunity of using what we can do. And you're absolutely right in what you said. If we do away with agriculture in Europe, simply we're not going to do away with emissions. We're going to have more emissions at the global scale. And our analysis point that out. And that's one of the other areas that forestry has the possibility to contribute in terms of capturing what carbon and what goes in the air. So what you're going to see is more opportunities for member states to introduce measures that try to grasp what is coming in terms of bioeconomy. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is also there is a very significant increase in the money spent on research for that. And I raise that because that's important for generating knowledge in the medium and longer term. But much more important is using the knowledge that we have already in terms of best practices and innovation and spreading it around. Thank you very much for your attention. Apologies if we don't agree on anything. I think we agree on one thing, that it's, at least I find it very amusing and very interesting and also fulfilling me in being here and discussing with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tassos. Roland.
Thank you, Tassos. Rolandas, would you like to say a few words in reaction to what was happening? A few words. I would like to ask Tassos to show slide number 12. The representative of the European Commission showed 40 slides, and all those 40 slides were focused on one and the same thing that is very painful, emotionally painful, and related to our identity. We have our own figures, our own arguments, and the negotiations will continue on that. And of course, we didn't have a chance to discuss other issues from the package of suggestions. Nobody noticed that actually fewer money will be spent on school schemes, that some of the areas that are less favorable for agriculture will not be included in the environmental objectives area. But actually, it is our right to do what we want to do. All of this is based on long-lasting history, a number of elements that we didn't have any impact on because we joined much later. The overall EU process, the process is not that speedy as we would like it to be. And if we decide to start it all anew, the situation and the policy would look very, very different. But at least both the Commission and we agree about the external convergence, and of course we have a different outlook on that. But this is our task for the negotiation process. We will have to prove our point, our social partners will have to prove their own point, and we will continue discussing it with our colleagues. I started with basketball, I will finish up with basketball. And we could have a basketball match between Lithuania and Greece, I think. We could play a basketball match. And if we lose for the first time, we can continue playing as long as we win, because we do not want to lose. And this would be a kind of intermediary solution or way out of the situation. That was a joke. It was supposed to be a joke. But again, as I said, I feel the déjà vu. The situation is very similar to the one that we had in January. Of course, we shouldn't say that only a dark night is awaiting for us in the future. There are some slight rays of sun, and the morning will be much, much lighter than the night. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for participating. Thank you for raising questions. It is very important to have a discussion of the kind. It is very important to have open discussions without hiding anything. It is extremely important for you and extremely important for us as representatives of the European Commission. Thank you, Tassos Haniočiu, for finding time to come to Vilnius and meet us and participate in open discussions. Thank you for taking our ideas down on paper and bringing them back to the European Commission. And we have only started with the proposal. The negotiations are about to begin. This is the beginning of a very important path into the future, and I hope that all of us will come out as winners, both Lithuania and Europe. Thank you.